Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to try to answer a question we've been getting a lot lately, and it's a really complex one. What would a Trump presidency mean for Tesla?
Yeah, that's a big question for sure. We're going to try to do it justice using this in-depth analysis we got. It looks at the potential benefits and challenges across the board. So manufacturing, energy, global markets, the whole nine yards.
It really does touch on just about every aspect of what they do. You know, when you think about it, Tesla's success is not just about building great cars.
Yeah. No, it's not.
It's really deeply tied to government policies and global economic forces.
For sure. I mean, think about it. A change in the political landscape could have ripple effects throughout their entire business. And I mean their entire operation.
Okay, so let's try to break this down for our listener. And I think the best place to start is with the potential upsides. So our analysis suggests some of the policies that a Trump administration might put into place could actually create tailwinds for Tesla. Yeah, for example, the analysis mentions a potential for streamlined regulations and faster construction approvals. I mean, just imagine gigafactories going up even faster than they already do.
Right, and it's not just about speed, is it? I mean, streamlined regulations, that also often means lower costs and fewer bureaucratic hurdles.
That's a good point.
And then, I mean, if history is any guide, we might also see corporate tax cuts.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And that would obviously be a big boost to their profitability.
Yeah. And we can't forget about the potential for, a big infrastructure push. That was a big part of the Trump administration's plans in the past. So that could mean federal dollars flowing into things like EV charging networks. And that would obviously benefit the expansion of Tesla's supercharger network. Plus, their energy storage solutions, like those megapacks we've talked about, could also get a boost from, grid modernization efforts.
Exactly. And on top of that, you have to factor in the push for energy independence, which is, let's be honest, it's probably going to be a big focus. That could lead to policies that would really incentivize domestic battery production and maybe even encourage Tesla to source more of those key materials locally, which would make their vertical integration strategy even stronger.
So we're talking about a scenario where Tesla becomes even more self-reliant, controls even more of their supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. And that would make them less vulnerable to all the global supply chain disruptions we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so far we've got streamlined manufacturing, a potential infrastructure boom, and this push for energy independence. And all of that's potentially lining up in Tesla's favor. But it can't all be good news, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are definitely some potential challenges that Tesla might face.
Okay, so what are we talking about? What are some of the big ones?
Well, one of the biggest uncertainties revolves around that $7,500 federal tax credit for EVs.
Yeah, right.
I mean, if that's revised or eliminated, it could really put a dent in demand, and especially for Tesla's more affordable models.
Okay, so let's just pause there for a second and really think about what this means for our listener.
Sure.
Would Tesla have to slash prices to stay competitive? Could we see this squeeze their already pretty thin margins?
Well, yeah, I mean, those are definitely questions that Tesla would have to grapple with. And it's not just the federal tax credit either. You also have to think about the potential ripple effect on state-level EV incentives. A lot of those are linked to the federal policies. So if those incentives start to shrink or disappear, it could impact Tesla's ZEV credit revenue.
Now, hold on a second. For those who are listening who might not be familiar, what are ZEV credits?
Oh, yeah. So those are basically credits that Tesla earns for selling zero-emission vehicles.
Oh, okay.
And they can then sell those credits to other automakers who are struggling to meet emissions regulations.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually a significant revenue stream for them. Any changes there could have a real impact.
Wow. So it sounds like we're talking about a potential double whammy here. You've got a hit to demand and a hit to revenue. That's a lot for any company to absorb, even a company as, innovative as Tesla.
You're telling me, and we haven't even talked about China yet. Trying to navigate U.S.-China relations under a Trump administration is going to be a delicate balancing act, to say the least.
Yeah, no kidding.
There's definitely the potential for escalating tariffs, which could really disrupt things, disrupt Tesla's Shanghai factory exports and put pressure on the supply chains.
That Shanghai factory is super important for Tesla's global expansion, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're producing cars there, not just for the Chinese market, but for export to Europe and other regions.
So any kind of disruption there would have far-reaching consequences.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's always the possibility of market access restrictions in China, which could limit Tesla's growth in what is their largest international market.
So not only could they face disruptions to production and exports, But they could also have limitations on actually selling their cars in China.
Exactly. It's a pretty significant hurdle.
Yeah, no kidding.
And on top of that, there's the potential for stricter controls on technology transfer,
Oh, right.
which could limit Tesla's ability to partner with Chinese companies. And that could hamper their battery technology development.
Wow, so we've got potential trade wars, market access restrictions, limits on technology sharing. China suddenly sounds like a minefield for Tesla.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex landscape.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a second and talk about environmental regulations. Our analysis suggests this could be a bit of a double-edged sword for Tesla. Can you explain how that is?
Well, you might think that relaxed emission standards would be good news from an electric car company, right?
Yeah, you would think so.
But it could actually slow down the overall transition to EVs. Because if the traditional automakers face less pressure to meet stricter emissions targets, they're going to be less inclined to invest as heavily in EVs.
That's a good point.
So in a way, it gives those traditional automakers more breathing room to sort of catch up to Tesla.
So instead of accelerating the shift to EVs, it could actually create a more gradual transition, which could give the other guys more time to close the gap.
Exactly. And then, of course, we can't forget about the impact on Tesla's regulatory credit revenue. Any changes to the carbon credit market or state-level environmental programs could affect that income stream.
Right. Okay, so we've got these potential challenges starting to stack up here. We've got uncertainty around EV incentives, the complexities of navigating U.S.-China relations, and the potential for relaxed environmental regulations to actually slow down the EV transition. It sounds like Tesla would need to be incredibly agile and adaptable to thrive in this environment. But let's talk about that. I mean, how might they actually respond to these challenges? What do you think?
Well, I think that's where things get really interesting, right? Because Tesla is known for its ability to innovate and adapt. And I think we'd see them making some pretty strategic moves to mitigate these risks and capitalize on whatever opportunities they can find.
Okay, so let's dig into those strategic moves. What kind of adjustments might we see Tesla making to navigate this whole complex landscape?
Well, one key strategy, I think, would be to further diversify their geographic footprint.
Okay.
They could look beyond the sort of traditional markets and explore regions with, rapidly growing EV adoption, places like Southeast Asia or India.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, those regions offer lower labor costs and potentially less political friction than, say, China.
So spreading their wings and not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And within their existing markets, they could prioritize the higher margin vehicles, perhaps even, focusing on the models that are less reliant on those federal tax credits that we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. So adjusting their product mix to align with the changing market. That makes a lot of sense. But what about their energy business? Could that play a role in their strategy here?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Their energy storage solutions, the megapacks and power walls, could become even more important as a kind of hedge against any turbulence in the EV market. Doubling down on that side of the business could provide a steadier revenue stream while they, navigate the challenges in the car market.
That's true. And we can't forget Tesla's, relentless pursuit of technological innovation.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, they're always pushing the boundaries of what's possible. So I think it's pretty safe to assume they'll continue to invest heavily in R&D.
Absolutely. Maintaining that technological edge, through cutting-edge battery technology, advancements in self-driving, maybe even exploring new things like robotics. Who knows? Those could be real game changers.
It's almost like they're playing 4D chess. They're anticipating future challenges and developing solutions before those challenges even really materialize.
Yeah, I like that analogy. But they're not just focused on the technology either. They also need to be smart about how they position their brand and how they market themselves, In a highly politically charged environment, they might need to really emphasize their commitment to American manufacturing and job creation while carefully navigating the complexities of global trade.
So a delicate balancing act to maintain their brand appeal while still, pursuing their global ambitions.
Exactly, yeah. They need to be mindful of those political wins, but without compromising their core values.
This is already so much to take in, and we haven't even touched on the potential market reactions and the ripple effects on the entire industry. But before we jump into that, I want to pause here and ask our listeners a question. Given everything we've discussed so far, what stands out to you as the most significant potential impact of a Trump presidency on Tesla? And what would you be watching closely to see how this all plays out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Take a minute to really think about what we've talked about, the benefits, the challenges, Tesla's potential responses. What really resonates with you? And what questions do you still have?
We'll be right back after a short break to continue our deep dive and explore those market reactions and what this all means for the future of Tesla and the whole EV industry.
Welcome back. I'm really curious to hear what stood out to you in the first part of our deep dive.
Yeah, me too. There's so much to unpack with this topic, but I think now we should move on to, looking at how the markets might react to a potential Trump presidency.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about a lot of possibilities, and I think it's safe to say that all this policy uncertainty could make the stock market, well, pretty jittery.
Yeah, and that could have a real impact on Tesla, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, their stock-based compensation and even their financing options could be affected. Volatility is not always a good thing, especially for a company that relies on the stock market for capital.
Right, because Tesla has used its stock to fund a lot of its growth and acquisitions.
Exactly.
So any kind of significant drop in their share price could really limit their options going forward.
For sure. And then you have to think about how all of this could affect the broader EV landscape.
Okay, yeah. So how would a Trump presidency potentially change the playing field for other EV makers?
Well, I mean, if you have things like relaxed emission standards, it could take some of the pressure off those traditional automakers.
Oh, interesting.
And that could give them more time to catch up in the EV race, which could put some pressure on Tesla's market share.
It's like in a chess match, when one player suddenly gets a few extra moves to strategize.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
How do you think Tesla would respond to that kind of increased competition?
Well, I think they'd probably double down on what they're already good at, technological advancements.
Yeah.
Make their vehicles even more desirable and harder to compete with.
Makes sense.
And they could also focus even more intensely on reducing those production costs, which would allow them to offer more competitive pricing.
Right, so it's all about staying ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
And we talked earlier about their energy business, with the mega packs and power walls.
Yeah.
Could that become an even bigger part of their strategy in this scenario?
Oh, I think it could. I mean, that market is growing so rapidly, and it's not as sensitive to the political stuff that might be going on. So it's like having a diversified portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Having a really strong energy storage business could provide some stability and growth, even if EV sales take a hit.
It's like a safety net almost.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If you were advising Tesla, what would be your top recommendation? What should they prioritize in this environment?
That is a great question. And honestly, there's no easy answer. I mean, it's a really complex situation. You've got the potential upsides, the challenges, and all the different ways Tesla could respond. It's like a real life business simulation, but with much higher stakes.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts here. So beyond just picking a single strategy, what other insights can you offer our listener as they try to make sense of all of this? What are some of the key things to watch?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Tesla isn't just reacting to the political landscape. They're also trying to shape it.
Oh, that's a point.
Through their lobbying efforts, partnerships, even Elon Musk's, pronouncements, all of that can influence policy decisions.
Right. They're not just pawns in this game. They're players.
Yeah.
So what should our listener be paying attention to as they try to track how all of this unfolds? What are some specific things they can look for?
Okay, so on the policy front, definitely keep an eye on any executive orders related to manufacturing,
Okay.
Any developments in trade policy with China, and of course, any changes to environmental regulations.
Right. Those are the big, macro level things. What about closer to home for Tesla? What are some metrics that might give us some insight into how they're doing and how they're adapting?
I'd say definitely keep tabs on EV adoption rates, both here in the US and globally. That'll tell us a lot about consumer demand and how Tesla's sales are holding up. Also, keep an eye on battery material costs, as those can really impact their production costs and ultimately their profitability.
Right.
And of course, those financial reports, always pay close attention to those.
Yeah, those are always full of valuable information. What should we be looking for specifically in those reports?
Definitely focus on Tesla's gross margins, especially by region. That will give you some clues about how they're navigating those potential trade challenges. Also, keep an eye on their regulatory credit revenue, which could fluctuate as policies change.
Makes sense.
And finally, don't overlook their R&D investments. That will tell you a lot about how committed they are to staying ahead of the game technologically.
It's there's a whole other level of analysis that can be done just based on their financial reports.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot to dig into there.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners on how they can make sense of all of this? It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is. I think the most important thing to remember is that the impact of a Trump presidency on Tesla is not going to be a simple plus or minus. It's going to be a really complex interplay of forces with winners and losers emerging in ways that we might not expect. So, keep an open mind, consider multiple perspectives, and don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions as you're following this story.
That's really good advice. And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning of the exploration. We've provided a framework for understanding the potential impacts, but the story is still unfolding. There's so much more to come.
Yeah, it's definitely an evolving situation, and we've only scratched the surface here. But hopefully, by understanding those potential upsides and those looming challenges and the different ways that Tesla might respond, our listeners can start to see the bigger picture and draw their own conclusions.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, right? I mean, this is a story with a lot of twists and turns still to come. So before we wrap up completely, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question. So imagine, you're sitting there in Elon Musk's chair. You're at the helm of Tesla, and you're facing all this uncertainty, this new political landscape. What would be your boldest move? I mean, would you go all in on U.S. manufacturing, even with the risk of those trade tensions we talked about? Or would you maybe shift your focus to those emerging markets like India and Southeast Asia? What would you do?
Man, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, there's no easy answer. It all comes down to how Tesla weighs the potential risks and rewards and, how they see those political winds shifting, which is tough to predict, let's be honest.
It's a really high-stakes game of strategy, and every decision they make is going to have these ripple effects. But that's kind of what makes it so interesting to watch, right? I mean, we get to see how a company like Tesla, a company that's known for innovation and disruption, how do they respond to these really complex challenges?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a real-world case study. You see it play out in real time, how they adapt, how they make strategic decisions, and it just highlights how interconnected everything is. Politics, technology, global markets, even consumer behavior. It's not just about building cars anymore. It's about understanding these larger forces at play and positioning yourself to thrive no matter what happens.
Yeah, and that's really what we've tried to do in this deep dive. We've tried to give you a framework for understanding those forces and how they could affect Tesla's path forward. We talked about the potential upsides, the challenges they might face, the different strategies they could use. But at the end of the day, the future is uncertain. Right. Nobody has a crystal ball. What happens next really depends on a whole bunch of things, a lot of which are, outside anyone's control.
The only thing we know for sure is that it's going to be interesting to watch. Tesla's a company that constantly pushes the boundaries. They challenge the status quo, and that makes them both unpredictable and incredibly exciting to follow.
So as you keep following their journey, remember what we've talked about today. Keep an eye on those policy changes, watch those market trends, and, don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions along the way. Because the world of Tesla, it's full of surprises. And the only way to stay ahead of the curve is to stay informed, keep asking those tough questions.
Well said. And with that, I think we'll leave it there for today. Let our listeners ponder the possibilities. Thanks for joining us on another deep dive.
Until next time, keep exploring.